Hi, I'm Jeb Butler with the Butler Law Firm, and this is Tom Giannotti, another of our lawyers. Today we'll talk briefly about a case that Tom and I just settled, a wrongful death case that just settled for $1.25 million. Now this case arose in the great state of Georgia, but far south of our home in Atlanta. Specifically, to see where this happened, we need to take a trip down to Colquitt, Georgia, which is right here, and more specifically, to Highway 27, just outside the Circle K, a convenience store there in Colquitt. Now, thanks. A wrongful death case involves not only our client, that is the person we actually represent, but the decedent, or the person who died. And the way this happened is that our decedent was an older man who was in a scooter. Like a mobility scooter like you might see at the grocery store for people to get around, and not the kind that college kids ride, on the campuses or whatever. But he was on his scooter because he was an amputee, and that was his only way to get around. And so he was at the gas station here and decided to leave the gas station where he went often, most days, and go back to his home, which is over here. To do that, he has to leave the gas station, of course, come out on the highway. He was doing that, came down to about here, and this is when the at-fault driver crashed into him. Of course, had he been able to keep going, his intention was to go, on down this road and back to where he lived. But he never made it, because when he was part way across the road, a young student from, I think FSU, one of the universities in Florida, was hauling down the road and ran into him. Ended his life. So we got the call on this case, and we immediately got to work. I went down there the day after the collision and started investigating. But before we get to that, Tom will talk with you a little bit about what we first found when we started looking into the case immediately.
Yeah. So the first step in most cases is to get a copy of the police report. So that's what we did, and we actually spoke with the state trooper who was investigating this fatal collision. But the police report itself was bad for us, frankly. It put the fault on the decedent, and this is a copy of that police report. And you can see here it's highlighted "suspected at fault." And part of the reason in talking with the state trooper about why he put the fault on our client essentially is that he was in this motorized scooter, and they essentially treated this scooter as though he was another car. But something just didn't quite add up to us about that. First of all, that every driver has a duty to maintain a proper lookout, which is basically what it sounds like. You have a duty to pay attention to the road in front of you. And as we'll see here shortly, Jeb went down and did a site inspection. He actually drove down the very road that the driver would have taken, and you can see, it was broad daylight, as you can see here from the time of the crash at 4:30 p.m. In April 2021. So broad daylight. It was as you'll see in the video shortly, it's a straight road. There was nothing really that prevented her from seeing our decedent, just something didn't add up. We suspected she may have been distracted, and Jeb actually spoke with a witness who talked about how she was flying down the road, and then Jeb actually was able to get a surveillance video from the Circle K gas station that we were able to get to an expert who could analyze the speed on the video and determine conclusively that she was in fact speeding. So again, just the police report itself was not very helpful, but further investigation was really what broke this case open.
When we started looking at it, Tom's right. The first insight is that if the police really ought not treat a mobility scooter like a car, And the second, though, is if we start thinking of it like a pedestrian, and this, Tom, was something that you came up with, is that, part of the issue is that our decedent, one problem we had to deal with is that our decedent isn't a crosswalk. But he can't really be faulted for that, because there's not one. You know, our decedent is a citizen of the United States of America. He's got the right to cross the street if he needs to, just like everybody else does. And there just isn't a better place for him to cross. If you look further south, or further, I guess, southeast, or excuse me, or northwest, there's just not a crosswalk anywhere close to this Circle K. And given that, we felt like what our decedent did was reasonable. So as Tom said, one of the things we did was to get down there to the scene of the collision. So I drove down there, and one of the first things that I did was to get in my own car. Let's see here. And take a drive. That is, to drive the same road at the speed limit that the at-fault driver had been driving when she ran into our decedent and killed him. So you'll see here in this video, we'll start at about 15 seconds. And you'll first see the speed limit sign on the right, which is going to say 45 miles an hour. It'll eventually turn to 35 zone, and if you watch here, you'll see I keep with the speed. But just as we round this curve up ahead here, and we'll adjust the brightness so you can see the screen a little better. As we round this curve up ahead and take a left, you'll be able to see something kind of red on the road down ahead to the right. And that's what you're seeing is something that's just past the Circle K convenience store. So basically what this tells you, and it should become clear as we watch the video, is that from about the time she clears this curve until a long time on down a little hill, she had a perfectly clear view of the Circle K and should clearly have been able to see our decedent on that mobility scooter across the road. So here it is without further preamble. Circle K is down here just in front of that red object. And you can see, I mean, it's a long straightaway. It was clear as day when I made this video, the clear as day on the day of the collision. There's just no reason, as we found out when we got to the scene, for the driver not to see the decedent crossing the road. And this is the Circle K coming up right here on the right. And then, let's see, Tom, get ready to hit pause, if you will, and press it. There we go, good. So right up here is actually where the collision occurred. So it was pretty clear upon visiting the scene and looking around that this driver should have seen our guy and should not have crashed into him. So that's only part of the work. You know, from there you got to start talking to people, doing some more work. I went to the Circle K, talked with the manager, got in touch with the owner, and they got permission, and we eventually got a hold of the actual video, a surveillance video that showed the collision. Now, whenever someone asks, you know, Tom and me about, well, when do you have to hire a lawyer, one of the things we always say is that under the law, the statute of limitations gives you a long time. But it's best to act fast, because if you do that, your lawyer can uncover evidence that's going to disappear if you don't act fast. And this is a great example of that. Our client called us one day. Next day, I'm in Colquitt, Georgia, on the scene of this collision, and was able to go inside the Circle K and get a copy of the surveillance video that showed this collision. That surveillance video isn't going to last very long. Most businesses record over in like a week or two. So if you don't move fast, it can be gone. Luckily, we got there and we were able to cover the video. And here it is. We'll play this. This is our decedent in his scooter. He's going to come out here into the roadway. Let me adjust the brightness again. And he'll be moving this way. He'll be actually behind this pole when the collision occurs. And then you'll see, before it happens, you'll see the white sedan come from this way on down US 27 and collide with him. Will you hit play for us? Thanks. And there it is. That was the collision right behind the pole. Pauses, if you will, hit the little square. Thanks. So that tells us, quite a lot. It shows that there's nothing in the, obstructing or hindering the view of the at-fault driver. Kept talking to witnesses, found another witness there on the scene, and I got a recorded audio statement saying that, yes, she saw our decedent motor out into the roadway and saw him look both ways, and then tracked down an even better witness. This was someone who was actually after the collision occurred, and our decedent is in a ditch on the side of the road. She runs over. In fact, I think this is her. She runs over and is one of the last people to talk to our decedent alive, because he died there on the scene of the collision, but he was alive for a few minutes, and she was able to speak a few words with him. So I found her, got on the phone, arranged a time to meet, went and met her at a restaurant in Donaldsonville, Georgia, where she worked. It's about 2 towns over, and got a written affidavit from her, which we'll talk about next. Now, an affidavit is just sworn testimony, just like in a courtroom, except it's in writing. And it's helpful to get that early in a case, because then you know what the witness says and what they believe. They're kind of locked into it, and you can use that for certain things in court, for motions practice, for example. So this is the type of affidavit that our firm, goodness gracious. Often uses. We'll just let it be blue, I guess. But it's a form. The top of it we fill in, and it says 18 years old, and give it to the Butler Law Firm. And then we'll handwrite it according to what the witness says, and then be able to present that. So here she says she saw the collision. This was an important part. She says, I saw the white car approaching, and says she could tell even beforehand that it was going really fast. Much faster than 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. And she says, I thought to myself, that car is flying. And then keep scrolling down. She confirms, as we suspected, there was nothing to prevent the driver of the white car from seeing the decedent. I blacked out the name of the decedent for privacy purposes. And then she said saw the white car hit him, saw our decedent look both ways before he got out there. And here in paragraph 8, she talks about how when she got to the decedent, he was still alive, which matters from a legal perspective because it shows conscious pain and suffering, which is an element of damages under the law. I thought that paragraph 9 was really important here. She says, the driver of the white car came up to me. She said several times, I didn't see him. Now, that's important because, perhaps there could be some excuse for this. Maybe she might say, the at-fault driver might later claim, oh, my accelerator pedal was stuck, or, I don't know what she could say. But not seeing him is not a good excuse. That's just not valid. There's plenty of room to see him. It's broad daylight. So if at the scene of the collision, her excuse is, I didn't see him, well, that tells us this person's at fault because there's just no excuse for not seeing the person. And then the affidavit continues on. There's a few more details. And then it contained our witness's signature right there. So that's a long talk actually about doing work on the scene and witness work. Tell us about experts.
Yeah, so one of the things we did early on in the case was to get a accident reconstruction expert, which in this case was somebody who used to do this for law enforcement, go out and take measurements, things like speed, time, distance, and essentially reconstruct the scene through those measurements, photographs, flying a drone overhead, doing 3D mapping of the scene, as well as inspecting the vehicles, inspecting the scooter. And although we didn't quite reach this point yet in the case, because the insurance, for reasons we'll get into shortly, related to the insurance company, the sedan that struck the decedent had EDR data, which is basically a black box that tells you how fast the car is going. So if the video hadn't been clear enough, I mean, it was just right there. The insurance company surely knew that this driver was speeding, and as Jeb said, there's just simply no excuse for not seeing somebody in broad daylight like that, whether it's a scooter, motorcycle, bicycle, and any other pedestrian, etc. There's just no excuse. But that expert was very helpful in trying to build up our case, and I'll get into insurance if
Yeah.
So the reason why we never quite got to litigate this case was the insurance company agreed to pay it their full insurance limits of $1.25 million, but that was somewhat easier said than done. They were, a lot of times insurance companies in car accident cases are very quick to just tell you what their limits are. There's a statute.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, this is the settlement offer we sent, and if you see here, it even talks about why State Farm, the insurance company, needed to settle this case, and why we would take this case to trial, and this is really what we're getting at here is the coverage. So most insurance companies will tell you right off the bat, this is what we have, a $25,000 or $100,000 policy. Here's our declarations page. We'll fax it over within a few days, usually, of receiving a request. There's a law in Georgia that says they have 60 days to provide that. So, it's around getting close to the 60th day, and we haven't heard anything from State Farm. They ended up telling us, well, there's a $250,000 insurance policy. We actually had already gotten that information through another source. But essentially, when you get to that level, that's when insurance companies will allow you to purchase an umbrella policy or excess coverage to protect your assets above that level. So
basically, we're dealing with, just if I could interject,
Yeah.
two different types of insurance policies here. One is what we call the underlying liability insurance policies. And that's the kind of insurance that Georgia law requires all of us to buy. The state minimum is $25,000, but they can go on up, and this one was $250,000. Now, in this case, there was another layer of insurance that, as Tom's hinting at, the insurance company, State Farm, didn't seem to want to tell us about. We had to kind of dig and find it and come up with another source and triangulate on them. But that was a $1 million umbrella policy. So why do we suspect that there was an umbrella policy, even though State Farm wasn't really telling us about it?
Yeah, and as Jeb was saying, that's when you start getting a $200,000, $300,000, insurance companies, if you want to purchase an excess or umbrella policy, they'll require you to have that a certain level of underlying, which is typically around $200,000, $300,000. So given that there was a $250,000 underlying policy, and just given that they were being somewhat shady in general or reluctant to tell us stuff, we suspected that there was going to be more, possibly an umbrella policy of some kind, and we had to, it was like pulling teeth, but we finally got the information. They initially didn't even want to tell us about it because they thought it wouldn't provide coverage because the at-fault driver was a college student and the policy actually was in her mother's name. But we got them to, they actually didn't even give it to us. We actually got another State Farm policy and looked at it and analyzed the policy language and figured out that it did provide or arguably provided coverage for what we call a resident relative, which is a little bit even trickier here because she was a college student. We didn't get into depositions, but we weren't sure exactly if she lived full-time in college or lived full-time at home, and just, there's a lot of things, but we actually did, there's some good authority and some law in Georgia that says that somebody can have multiple residences in that situation. So we felt pretty confident about this representation here, and State Farm did the right thing in this particular case and agreed to pay those limits.
Well, they didn't have a good choice. If they hadn't, we'd have heard it even worse.
Yeah,
That's why I
that's
said it. You know, so when you do, when you send an offer like this, it gets a little complicated. You need to do it in a certain way. It needs to be drafted in a certain way such that if the insurance company fails to accept it, then the consequences for it could be even worse. So we are quite painstaking about how we go through that. You can see it's kind of the length of our offer letter, even though we try to keep it as short as possible. There's a lot that needs to be in there. It needs to be done, at least in our judgment, just exactly right. So that's the case in a nutshell. You know, sometimes I feel like people hear about settlements in personal injury cases and think, oh, it must be just that easy. Get hurt, get a check. I'm here to tell you it ain't quite that simple. It's kind of like a duck paddling across a pond. You know, the duck goes from one side to another, and it might look really easy, but there's a lot of paddling and work going on underneath. Thanks.